I first approached the Hôtel des Postes on Rue du Louvre, expecting nothing unusual. The official record states its construction began in 1878 under the direction of architect Julien Guadet, a straightforward example of late 19th century Parisian monumentalism. I had come merely to examine a renovation file dated 1923, referenced in an old engineering journal I'd been reviewing. The file included one sepia photograph of the sub-basement, a blurred print labeled Original Service Chamber prior to demolition. As I studied it beneath the reading lamp, I noticed a detail the caption didn't address. A perfectly circular stone aperture set into the floor, cut with a precision unfamiliar to masonry from the 1870s. Its beveled interior looked machined, not chiseled, and the journals called it a drainage feature. Yet its geometry matched diagrams I had seen in discussions of Tartarian hydraulic systems, patterns alternative researchers argue predate modern Paris. I closed the folder quietly. Something here warranted a closer look. The official documents insist that construction began in 1878, with workers breaking ground under Guadet's oversight, employing standard iron beams and limestone blocks sourced from San Maxima. Yet while reviewing the 1879 progress photographs stored in the Bibliothèque Nationale, I found something peculiar. One wide shot, taken from the northeast corner of the lot, shows the early foundation trench. According to the journal entry accompanying it, workers had encountered a prior structure of limited significance. But the photograph reveals more than the text, a band of dark stone arranged in a radial pattern, unlike any 19th century Parisian masonry. Each stone segment appears cut to within millimetric precision. The radius, when measured against the workers standing beside it, forms a near-perfect 3.4-meter curve. Victorian tools could shape stone, yes, but not to such consistent internal curvature without mechanical assistance. As I compared measurements, I found an older map from 1842 where the same location is shaded faintly with a notation, ancien ouvrage inconnu, unknown works. The phrase itself felt like a confession buried in plain sight, an admission that something existed here before the official record began. The cartographer had seen something and noted it without explanation. Some researchers argue these radial patterns are characteristic of Tartarian pump housings, part of a broader hydraulic grid believed to have existed beneath European cities. The term appears on atlases from the 18th century, vast regions labeled simply Tartary, and certain architectural historians have begun linking the geometric precision of these buried structures to that cartographic mystery. I remained skeptical, yet the geometric perfection unsettled me. The stones fit together without visible mortar, their edges beveled at angles too consistent for hand finishing. No contemporary technique could explain such tolerances. The craftsmanship exceeded what the era supposedly permitted. And then, a small detail. The 1879 photograph shows a sealed archway in the trench wall. The renovation notes never mention it again. What structure predated Guadet's foundations, and why was its archway immediately buried? The silence in the record felt deliberate, almost protective, as if acknowledging the arch would require explanations no one wished to provide. I returned to the archival photograph several times over the following days. The arch's voussoirs appeared unusually thin, their joints nearly invisible. A magnified scan revealed something stranger, a faint metallic sheen within the mortar line of the keystone, perhaps an iron dowel, though too slender for typical 19th century reinforcement. The precision of the metalwork suggested industrial manufacture, yet the surrounding stone bore no marks of modern tooling. The contradiction nagged at me relentlessly. A construction report dated February 1880, written by site engineer M. Lefebvre, contains a short but intriguing line: "Subterranean aperture remains sealed pending review. Composition anomalous, likely earlier installation. Earlier installation. Yet the lot was believed empty prior to 1878. I located an 1830 cadastral plan. The plot is simply labelled Old Quarter Cleared. Nothing more, no mention of what had been cleared or why. The absence of detail seemed intentional, a gap in the record where information should have been. I then examined renovation orders from the 1905 modernisation, which make repeated reference to removal of residual structures from Phase 0. Phase 0, the term isn't used elsewhere in Parisian architectural history. It implied a layer beneath the foundation, a starting point that preceded the official beginning. The language suggested that engineers recognized something existed before their work began, something they were instructed to remove rather than study. The terminology was clinical, detached, the vocabulary of disposal rather than discovery. The sealed arch reminded me of an illustration in a 1794 atlas I had studied months earlier, a diagram of sub-street vaults in regions then labelled Grande Tartarie. The curvature, the proportions, the thinness of the stone elements, the similarity was unsettling. The resemblance extended to specific measurements I had recorded. When I overlaid the dimensions, the match was nearly exact. I remained aware that such connections risked overinterpretation. But when physical characteristics align so precisely with those described in Tartarian scholarship, hydraulic conduits, archways fitted with metallic keystones, it becomes difficult to dismiss outright. What troubled me more was the silence in official documents. The arch simply disappears from all subsequent photographs. No explanation, no follow-up report, no curiosity recorded. Why erase something so structurally sophisticated unless it contradicted the narrative of the new city being built above it? The renovation file from 1923 should have cleared everything up, but instead it deepened the contradictions. The engineers then working beneath the Hôtel des Postes describe replacing obsolete drainage channels of unknown provenance. The accompanying blueprint shows a chamber roughly 4 meters wide, decked with a central circular aperture matching the photograph I had seen earlier. The blueprint, however, labels it Chambre ancienne à démolir, ancient chamber to be demolished. Along the western wall of the chamber, the blueprint includes faint dotted lines indicating possible continuation of earlier conduit. That conduit curves outward at a radius inconsistent with French engineering standards of the late 1800s. The curve is too smooth, too mathematically deliberate. I measured it against period drainage designs from the same archives, none matched. The geometry belonged to something else entirely, something no French engineer of that era had designed or documented. I cross-referenced it with a Tartarian infrastructure diagram published in a speculative monograph from the early 20th century. The resemblance to their hypothesized pressure distribution chambers was unmistakable. Still, my rational side held firm. This could be a misinterpretation. Coincidence remains possible until proven otherwise. Speculation is not evidence. I needed more before drawing conclusions. But then I discovered an annotation written in pencil in the margin of the 1923 blueprint. Do not disturb the second layer. Unknown material. Second layer? Unknown material? The notation was never formalized in the typed report submitted to the city. Someone had seen something beneath the foundation, something they chose not to document officially. The handwriting was hurried, almost nervous, pressed hard into the paper. The contradiction made something inside me tighten. Why were later engineers instructed not to disturb a layer supposedly older than the 1878 foundation, unless they recognized it as something anomalous, unless they feared what further excavation might reveal, unless the answers threatened assumptions they could not afford to question? The investigation could no longer remain confined to a single building. If this pattern existed here, it might exist elsewhere. I needed to widen the search considerably. My investigation expanded to include early photographs of other Parisian structures built around the same period. The archives contain progress images of the Gare de l'Est, officially begun in 1847, and the Gare du Nord, begun in 1861. In both cases, buried foundations revealed unexpected features that the official records barely acknowledged. A photograph from the Gare du Nord excavation shows workers standing beside a partially unearthed circular stone basin. The caption describes it as cistern remnant. Yet the stonework, alternating layers of red and pale limestone, duplicates patterns seen in what speculative researchers identify as Tartarian red brick hydraulic nodes. The dimensions match the Hôtel des Postes aperture almost exactly. The coincidence felt too precise to be accidental. The probability of such alignment occurring by chance seemed vanishingly small. I compared the curvature. My caliper measurements taken from high-resolution scans revealed a consistent radius of 3.4 meters, identical. Victorian engineering journals make no mention of such geometry. French civil engineering in the 1860s favored rectangular drainage channels and vaulted sewage tunnels, never perfect circular basins carved from composite stone. The technology to achieve such precision simply did not exist in documented form. No manufacturer claimed such capability. No patent described such methods. What's more, the Gare du Nord photograph contains a barely legible corner annotation. Pre-existing chamber, remove. It mirrors the same language used at Rue du Louvre. The repetition across sites indicated more than coincidence, a pattern. But what kind? Architectural, cultural, technological? The questions multiplied faster than answers arrived. And why did all these structures lie beneath the neighborhoods that Haussmann famously modernized? The Baron's grand renovation of Paris between 1853 and 1870 demolished entire medieval quarters, but the official histories speak only of what was built, never of what was found beneath. The erasure seemed systematic, coordinated across decades and administrations, as if guided by policy rather than accident. What exactly did the new Paris get built on top of? While searching the archives of the École des Ponts et Chaussées, I came across an unsigned engineering drawing catalogued under Unknown circa 1870. The paper had mellowed to a deep brown, its ink fading, but the geometry remained crisp. The drawing depicted a network of underground chambers radiating outward from a central circular hub. Thin lines indicate pressure channels connecting each chamber. The curvature precisely matches the anomalous structures I had been studying. Three things troubled me immediately. First, the drawing style did not resemble French engineering conventions from the 1870s. It lacked the shading and scale bars typical of école-trained draftsmen. The line work was spare, almost schematic, more like a diagram than a blueprint, as if the creator assumed the viewer already understood the system being depicted. Second, the paper watermark dated to 1841, decades earlier than the assigned date. Third, the terminology used, primary regulator, sub-pressure chamber, secondary outlet, corresponded almost word for word to descriptions in speculative writings on Tartarian hydraulic grids. These writings are not accepted by mainstream historians, but the physical drawing raised uncomfortable questions. If this was a speculative reconstruction, why would engineers of the period have used it? If it depicted known French infrastructure, why was it unsigned? Why was it misfiled by 3 decades? The cataloguing error seemed too convenient to be mere accident. I looked closer. The central hub bears a faint inscription, Ancien Système, ancient system. The use of the word ancient in a 19th century engineering document is highly unusual. Normally, such features would be described as old works or previous installations. The language suggested something older, something the draftsman considered beyond the scope of recent history, perhaps beyond the scope of known civilization itself. The language echoed the 1842 map I had seen earlier. Who produced this drawing, and what earlier system were they documenting or dismantling? I needed broader context. In several European atlases published from 1730 to 1820, vast regions across Eurasia were labelled simply Tartary. The term fell out of favour by the late 19th century, replaced by more precise ethnographic and political boundaries. Yet the atlases intrigued me because a few, particularly the 1787 Facades Atlas, depict star-shaped cities and radial street plans in areas now in Russia, Mongolia, and Central Asia. The geometric language resembled the radial patterns emerging beneath Paris. Of course, historical Tartary was a broad and vague label applied by European map makers who lacked detailed information. But certain architectural diagrams published in early travel journals showed domed structures with internal pressure chambers used for heating, systems far more advanced than the timeline typically allows. These motifs echoed the anomalous Parisian structures I'd been studying. The resemblance was difficult to attribute to chance alone, the patterns repeated across too many sources. I found a note in an 1819 travel report describing stoneworks of perfect circularity, origin uncertain, in a region then mapped as Chinese Tartary. The terminology created a bridge, not one of certainty, but of possibility. Could the anomalies in Paris represent an inherited architectural vocabulary, one never acknowledged because it did not fit the modernization narrative? Could European cities share a hidden foundation with structures found thousands of miles away? A journal excerpt from 1856, written by a Parisian engineer surveying old foundations, reads, "Stonework beneath the Marais resembles works found in old Tartarian regions, yet this cannot be. Likely coincidence." Likely coincidence. The phrase carried the weight of dismissal rather than explanation. The engineer saw the resemblance but refused to pursue it. His hesitation mirrored my own, until the evidence began to accumulate beyond what coincidence could explain. The dismissal felt like a door closing, a refusal to see what lay in plain sight. What happens when too many coincidences align into structure? The most revealing find came from the 1932 renovation of the École des Arts et Métiers. The official construction date of the main building is 1794, though much of its structure was rebuilt in the early 1800s. A renovation record describes workers breaking through a floor slab to reveal a void space, circular, depth unknown. The photograph shows a chamber lined with smooth stone, not limestone, not granite. Tests conducted at the time reportedly identified it as composite of unknown aggregate, composite stone in the early 19th century. The chamber's curvature matches, again, the 3.4-meter radius. At its center lies another circular aperture, this one filled with water due to a breach of nearby groundwater sources. The water obscured whatever lay beneath, but the visible stonework showed no deterioration despite decades of submersion. The material resisted decay in ways that natural stone should not. Its composition defied easy classification. A faint pencil notation on the backside of the photograph reads, "Not of our construction, retain if possible." The phrase, "not of our construction," haunted me for days. It acknowledged something the official record refused to state directly. The builders of the 19th century recognized they had inherited infrastructure they did not create. They knew they were building atop something older, something they could not explain. Across the city, beneath train stations, universities, government buildings, the same structures kept appearing, same radius, same curvature, same composite stone. Some researchers classify these circular chambers as remnants of Tartarian pressure hubs, used to distribute thermal energy or water across dense urban centers. While I cannot confirm such interpretations, the geometry is difficult to ignore. The official record offers no explanation for these repeated signatures, and the deeper I searched, the more frequently they appeared. Silent, buried, systematically overlooked. Waiting beneath the city like forgotten organs of a body no one remembers. If not ours, then whose? The research led me to examine renovation records from the 1890s to 1930s with greater scrutiny. Across dozens of documents, I found repeated references to structures that should not have existed beneath buildings constructed in the 19th century. The pattern was unmistakable once I knew what to look for. Each archive I visited revealed more of the same: anomalies dismissed, discoveries buried, questions left unasked. The Palais Royal renovations of 1897 mention clearance of lower vault infrastructure predating known construction. The Hôtel de Ville maintenance logs from 1912 reference mechanisms embedded in stone, function undetermined. In the archives of the Préfecture de Police, a 1904 memorandum describes the discovery of a circular shaft, possibly ventilation, cut with unusual precision beneath a wing added in 1882. Each report treats these discoveries as minor inconveniences rather than significant findings worthy of investigation. The language is dismissive, almost reflexively so, as if the writers had been trained to minimize what they encountered. Each discovery followed the same arc: initial surprise, cursory documentation, and then removal. The language of the reports is clinical, almost deliberately vague. Obsolete, redundant, pre-existing, never remarkable, never investigate further, never preserve for study. The vocabulary itself seemed designed to minimize curiosity, to close inquiry before it could begin. I noticed that the more unusual the finding, the shorter the description, as if brevity could contain the implications, as if fewer words meant fewer questions. The pattern suggested not ignorance but systematic disposal. Tartarian researchers argue that these erasures were deliberate, that Haussmann's Paris was not merely built upon older neighborhoods but upon the remnants of a prior technological system whose origins did not fit the narrative of progress. The theory sounds extreme until the documents begin to accumulate on your desk, until the photographs show the same impossible geometry beneath building after building, until the marginal notes reveal what the official reports omit. A 1909 engineering note from the metro construction beneath Place de la République states, encountered masonry of unusual composition, circular configuration, removed to allow tunneling, no further analysis, no preservation, no inquiry into what had been destroyed. The structure was simply eliminated to make way for the new. Progress demanded a blank slate. The future required forgetting. The question forming in my mind was no longer whether such structures existed. The evidence confirmed they did. The question was why they were so consistently destroyed and why no official inquiry ever followed. The silence felt coordinated, institutional, spanning decades and administrations. Someone, somewhere, had decided these discoveries were not to be pursued. As I read deeper into renovation documents across the early 20th century, a striking pattern emerged. Each time workers encountered older substructures, the official record described them in nearly identical terms: obsolete drainage elements, redundant cavities, old works. The repetition itself became evidence. The same phrases appeared in reports separated by decades and districts, as if drawn from a shared template of dismissal. But the physical descriptions in marginal notes, often handwritten, tell a different story. In the mid-1905 sewer expansion beneath the Marais, one engineer wrote, "Removed metallic valve embedded in masonry, function unclear." Metallic valve embedded where? The typed report omits this detail entirely. someone had chosen to exclude it from the official record. The omission felt deliberate, protective of a narrative that could not accommodate such anomalies. The handwritten note survived only because no one thought to destroy it. As a 1911 modernization beneath the Palais Royal mentions stone vault previously filled with pressurized air. Pressurized? The technology for sealed high-pressure chambers in the early 1800s was rudimentary at best. Such systems would have required precision engineering beyond documented capabilities, machined seals, calibrated release valves, materials that could withstand sustained pressure differentials without degradation. Yet there it was, noted casually in the margin as if the engineer understood the significance but chose not to elaborate, chose not to ask the obvious questions. A 1928 maintenance log for the Hôtel de Ville cites mechanisms of unknown purpose before noting their removal for scrap. The mechanisms were melted down before anyone could study them. Whatever they were, they are now lost forever. The iron went to foundries, the knowledge went nowhere. The opportunity for understanding was converted to raw material for new construction. Piece by piece, the record suggests deliberate erasure, or at least systematic disposal of infrastructure whose origin was unclear. Modern Tartarian researchers argue that these sealed chambers once formed part of a unified hydraulic grid, a network predating the official history of European cities. Mainstream historians reject this interpretation, citing lack of primary documentation. But the repetition of identical architectural signatures, especially those predating the documented construction, demands explanation. The absence of documentation is itself suspicious when the physical evidence is so consistent. When every discovery leads to the same response, removal without study, the pattern becomes the evidence. The 19th century builders of Paris were not fools. They recognized anomalies when they found them. Yet they chose removal over study, destruction over preservation, silence over inquiry. Why clear an entire city of its earlier systems unless those systems contradicted the narrative of Haussmann's newly envisioned Paris, unless acknowledging them would raise questions that progress could not answer? Unless the foundations of modernity required the erasure of what came before? Something was being erased. The documents prove that much. What remains unclear is why and what else might have been lost in the process. How much knowledge lies buried in foundry slag and construction fill? The turning point came when I noticed a similarity between Parisian substructures and domed chambers beneath certain star forts in Italy and the Netherlands. The connection emerged slowly through comparison of measurements I had been accumulating for months. At first it seemed impossible. How could structures separated by centuries and hundreds of miles share such precise geometric signatures? While cataloguing features of the Paris anomalies, I realized the 3.4-meter radius matched interior measurements of pressure domes in the Faubourg-Tange sublevels. These domes were built centuries earlier, yet exhibit machining-like smoothness. The stonework shows no chisel marks, no evidence of hand finishing, only the flawless curves of precision manufacture. I obtained photographs from a Dutch architectural archive, paying a small fee for high-resolution scans. The similarity seemed impossible, yet there it was, the same geometry, the same impossible precision, separated by 300 years and 500 kilometers. Similarly, in the Venetian lagoon, the Forte di Sant'Andrea contains buried domed chambers lined with composite stone. Their purpose remains disputed among historians. Some suggest water storage, others propose acoustic functions for communication or warning systems. None can explain the precision, none can account for the materials which resist identification even with modern analysis. The composite appears to be artificial stone, manufactured rather than quarried, its aggregate bound by methods no historical document describes. A colleague once mentioned that alternative researchers link star forts and dome chambers to Tartarian engineering, systems designed for defense, energy distribution, or water management on a continental scale. While such claims lie outside accepted scholarship, the architectural parallels between these European forts and Parisian substructures are too precise to ignore. The measurements align within millimeters, the materials match in composition, the geometry repeats with mathematical consistency: composite stone, circular chambers, perfect curvature, consistent radius. It suggested a shared architectural vocabulary, one spanning centuries and continents, one that should not exist according to conventional timelines. The implications were staggering. Either multiple civilizations independently developed identical engineering solutions without any documented contact or influence, or something connected them, something the historical record does not acknowledge. But how could identical geometric structures appear beneath Parisian buildings constructed centuries later? Either the 19th century builders inexplicably replicated older engineering without mentioning it, a massive, coordinated effort left entirely undocumented, or Paris was built atop earlier works whose origin no one recorded. The first explanation strains credibility beyond breaking. The second raises questions no one seems willing to ask, questions that challenge fundamental assumptions about the development of European cities, about the progression of technology, about what we think we know. A line from an 1868 Parisian journal struck me deeply. "We raised the new city upon layers not wholly understood." The admission is quiet, but revealing. The engineers of that era knew they were building upon something. They simply chose not to ask what. The silence was intentional. The ignorance was cultivated. Understanding would have complicated the project, would have required confronting mysteries that had no place in the age of progress. What city lay beneath Paris before Paris took shape? What hands built the foundations upon which modernity stands? My most troubling discovery came when studying a map of Paris's underground conduits, dating from 1929. Though incomplete, the map reveals a faint, dotted line cutting diagonally beneath modern streets, connecting structures whose anomalies I had already documented. The line was almost invisible, easy to miss unless you knew to look for it, easy to dismiss as a drafting error or a preliminary notation never completed. The line links the Hôtel des Postes, Gare du Nord, the École des Arts et Métiers, and the Palais Royal. The distances between these points form a nearly perfect geometric grid, with angles repeating at 45 and 90 degrees. Along the line, faint annotations describe priority reconfiguration zones. The terminology implies not discovery, but management, as if someone knew the grid existed and was working to modify it rather than merely encountering it by chance. The language suggests ongoing maintenance of something already present, something that predated the city's official infrastructure. This grid reflects what alternative Tartarian theories describe as power corridors, symmetrically arranged channels connecting hydraulic hubs across urban centers. The theory posits that such corridors once distributed water, heat, or atmospheric pressure throughout cities, serving functions we no longer understand because the systems were dismantled before they could be studied. A stretch of one corridor, uncovered briefly during wartime excavations in 1942, exposed a long stone conduit composed of interlocking segments fitted so precisely that even today a razor blade inserted between them would not pass. The joints showed no mortar, no adhesive, only the pressure of perfect fit. The engineering defied explanation. A wartime photograph, slightly damaged by water staining, shows workers standing beside the exposed conduit with expressions of apparent confusion. Their body language suggests uncertainty, perhaps unease. No report explains what they found or what became of it. The The conduit was presumably reburied or destroyed to continue the excavation. No 19th-century French document describes the construction of such conduits. The precision exceeds what period tools could achieve. Yet there they were, buried beneath the streets, connecting buildings constructed decades apart, following a geometry that no documented engineer ever designed. The conduits predate the buildings above them. The system predates the city as we know it. The grid suggests intention, a system older than the modern city, partially erased, partially preserved, wholly unexplained. Someone built this network. Someone designed this geometry. Someone laid these stones with precision that modern engineers would struggle to match. Some Tartarian researchers argue this grid once carried water, heat, or even atmospheric pressure across urban centers, a unified infrastructure serving purposes we no longer understand. I make no such claim, but the geometry is undeniable. The pattern exists, the connections are real, the measurements confirm what the eyes suspect. The evidence accumulates, whether we accept it or not. How many layers of Paris lie beneath the one we know? And who laid out the first? What purpose did these corridors serve, and why was that purpose forgotten? By this stage, my investigation had shifted from examining isolated anomalies to recognizing an interconnected system. The evidence had accumulated beyond what individual coincidence could explain. Each new discovery reinforced the pattern rather than contradicting it. The evidence, though incomplete and often erased, suggested Paris inherited an infrastructural matrix predating much of the documented city. The consistent geometry across chambers, conduits, domes, and sealed vaults indicated a technologically coherent network. This was not random accumulation, this was design. This was intention preserved in stone, waiting beneath the streets for someone to notice, for someone willing to ask the questions that progress had forbidden. Yet no archival source identifies its builders. Official records either ignore the anomalies or present them as minor remnants of earlier, poorly documented districts. But physical analysis contradicts these descriptions: composite stone, metallic keystones, perfect symmetry. These elements do not align with pre-Haussmann Paris, nor with the crude engineering of medieval or early modern structures. The technology exceeds what the timeline permits. The materials defy period manufacturing capabilities. The precision mocks the tools supposedly available. Every explanation offered by conventional history falls short of accounting for what the photographs reveal. Some alternative researchers classify such precision as Tartarian, the remnants of an advanced architectural culture that once spanned vast territories on historical maps labeled Tartary. While I make no definitive claim, I cannot ignore the parallels. Paris's new city may indeed have been laid atop something older, something unnamed, something deliberately forgotten, something whose existence raises questions the modern world prefers not to ask. The Tartarian hypothesis, however speculative, at least attempts to account for the evidence. The conventional narrative simply ignores it. A line from a 1931 technical memo captures this ambiguity. Structures encountered remain of unidentified origin, recommend removal. Instead of studying them, they removed them. Instead of preserving them, they filled them with concrete. Instead of asking questions, they wrote dismissive reports and moved on. The pattern repeated across decades, across administrations, across generations of engineers who encountered the same anomalies and reached the same convenient conclusions. The consistency of the response suggests coordination, policy, perhaps even explicit instruction. The pattern is consistent across decades of renovation records: discovery, dismissal, destruction. What knowledge did the builders of Paris choose not to preserve? What systems did they encounter and erase? And why does the geometry of those systems match structures found across Europe and across centuries? Why does the same radius appear beneath train stations and Renaissance forts, beneath universities and medieval foundations? Why does the same composite stone line chambers separated by 500 years? The unnamed cannot be explained, but it can be observed, and the observations accumulate into something that resembles truth, or at least demands acknowledgement. The evidence exists whether we accept it or not. I reviewed dozens of renovation logs. A disturbing consistency emerged. Each time workers discovered pre-existing chambers, the official response was not documentation, but demolition. The procedure was standard. The silence was policy. The erasure was systematic. Notes reference breaking up circular vault, filling old cavity, collapsing redundant shaft. In some cases, stone was carted away to be used as fill for new construction. The remnants of one era becoming the foundation of another, their origins erased by incorporation. This systemic destruction aligns with the modernization ethos of the 19th century. Haussmann's Paris demanded blank foundations for the new order. The past was inconvenient. The past asked questions the present could not answer. Progress required amnesia. Modernity required forgetting. But it also means that much of the earlier system was deliberately erased. What we cannot see today was actively destroyed, not merely forgotten. The absence is artificial, manufactured by policy and pickaxe. In the Carreau de Temple renovation of 1906, engineers discovered a chamber with stonework so smooth it reflected lantern light. The report claims it was dismantled due to instability. Yet the photograph shows no cracks, no signs of wear, no structural compromise whatsoever. Instead, a faint conduit emerges from the wall before abruptly ending, likely severed during removal. The instability was fabricated, the excuse was convenient. The real reason remains unspoken, buried with the stones themselves. Descriptions of similar finds in the Les Halles district were likewise dismissed. A 1914 note reads, "Subterranean feature of no current utility cleared. Utility determined destruction. What could not be used was eliminated. What could not be explained was erased. What could not be integrated into the narrative of progress was simply removed from the record. The logic was brutally efficient." Some speculative interpretations suggest that removing these structures obscured the remnants of a Tartarian grid, whether a hydraulic, atmospheric, or thermal system designed to serve functions we no longer comprehend. I cannot confirm such theories, but I can confirm the pattern of removal. The pattern is documented, the pattern is consistent. The pattern speaks louder than any single discovery. The structures existed, the photographs prove it, the renovation logs describe them, and yet today nothing remains but scattered documents and a handful of images showing chambers that no longer exist. The physical evidence was destroyed, only the paper trail survives, and even that is fragmentary, scattered across archives, misfiled and overlooked, preserved by accident rather than intention. What remains hidden because earlier systems were destroyed before anyone could study them? What knowledge was buried beneath the new foundations? What questions were we prevented from asking because the evidence was eliminated before we knew to look? In the end, my investigation returned to the first photograph I found, the 1879 image of the Hôtel des Postes excavation. Now, months later, I viewed it differently. The image had transformed in my understanding, its details carrying weight they had not possessed before. The sealed archway, once a curiosity, now appears as a node in a larger framework, one junction in a network that extended beneath the entire city and perhaps beyond. The circular aperture, once unexplained, now echoes chambers across Paris and across Europe, matching structures in Venice and the Netherlands, in forts and palaces separated by centuries and thousands of miles. The composite stone, the perfect curvature, the absence of tool marks, All now speak of a system older than the modern city, one whose traces were systematically erased by those who built atop it without understanding what they had found. The official narrative insists these are coincidences, irregularities, remnants of older Parisian districts, nothing more. The explanations are always vague, always dismissive, always final. They close inquiry rather than invite it. They protect a timeline that cannot accommodate what lies beneath. They preserve a story of progress that requires the past to be simpler, cruder, less capable than what the evidence reveals. But the geometry repeats, the materials repeat, the buried chambers repeat, and the pattern spanning stations, palaces, schools, and government buildings suggests intention, not accident, not coincidence, design on a scale that challenges everything we think we know. Tartarian researchers have long pointed to such signatures as evidence of a forgotten infrastructure, a civilization that predates our accepted histories, whose remnants were absorbed and erased by the cities that rose above them. I cannot prove their claims. The evidence is incomplete, fragmentary, systematically destroyed. But I can no longer dismiss them. The evidence I found, the photographs, the blueprints, the marginal notes, does not fit the accepted timeline. The precision exceeds documented capabilities. The geometry spans continents. And the silence in the archives speaks louder than the words that remain. As I pack away the folders, one image lingers, the sealed arch, half buried in shadow, its metallic keystone glinting faintly in the photographer's flash. A silent remnant of a system we did not build, a system the new city buried, a system that waited beneath the streets for over a century, patient and unexplained, for someone to notice what should not exist, what lies beneath Paris, beneath all our cities that we no longer recognize. What did we build upon and why did we choose to forget? What other evidence waits in archives, overlooked and misfiled, for someone willing to look? Final section, 450 words, final echo. A single archival photograph. Taken in 1879, a circular aperture cut into flawless stone, its edges too smooth, too exact. Labelled simply, original chamber removed. Nothing else remains except the question. And the question once asked does not fade. It waits, like the chambers themselves once waited, for someone willing to look beneath the surface of the city we think we know. It waits for someone willing to see what progress tried to bury. It waits, patient as stone, for the truth to be unearthed. The investigation ends here. But the mystery does not